On this episode of Micromatic, I review the Olympus EPL7 camera. Olympus loaned me this camera for a couple of weeks, and so I've been spending that time shooting with it. And I thought I would take a minute and just kind of share my thoughts about this camera, do a little review, and give you an idea of whether or not I think it's a good camera to buy or if maybe you should buy something else. So now the big feature that Olympus plays up with this camera is the selfie screen. The screen tilts down so that you can view yourself and take pictures of yourself. And a lot of their marketing material shows people taking photos of themselves. Obviously, the selfie market is a big market these days if you spend any time on Instagram. But the problem is that people that are really into camera gear very often are not the sort of people that are into selfies. And if you are into selfies, that's fine, there's no problem there. But a lot of people are kind of turned off by the fact that Olympus is pitching this as a selfie camera. The good news is that even though it is fantastic at taking selfies, it's top of the class at taking selfies. Even though it's really good at selfies and it's got features for that, it's not just a selfie camera. In fact, I've learned over the last couple of weeks that this is a very serious camera. It doesn't give up any features just because it has that tilting screen. So the great thing about the EPL7 is that it's got the same image quality as Olympus's more expensive cameras. Okay, Olympus has just come out with the OMD EM5 Mark II. It's a lot of letters, I'm sorry. Camera companies keep naming their cameras silly things. Olympus has just come out with the OMD EM5 Mark II, and that is basically their top of the line camera. It's brand new, it's an $1,100 camera, and this will take just as good of photos. It's got the same image sensor and processor, which is basically the ingredients that create great photos. On top of having the same image sensor as their more expensive cameras, this EPL7 also has Olympus's excellent in-body image stabilization. And if you don't know what that is, I'll take a moment to explain. Image stabilization, it holds the camera steady or holds your picture steady while you're taking a shot. That's really helpful in low light, but it's also really helpful for composing when you've got a really long telephoto shot, and really helpful for manual focus. And so a lot of cameras will rely on having image stabilization in the lens. And not all lenses will come with image stabilization. In fact, none of Olympus's lenses have image stabilization in them because they rely on the camera to have image stabilization built into it. So now the great thing about the EPL7 is it's got 3-axis image stabilization, which, okay, the number of axes probably don't matter that much. What does matter is that the image stabilization is active during composition, or it's active when you're half pressing the shutter button. The camera that this is replacing, the EPL5, it had image stabilization too, but it was only active while you were actually taking the photo. And so it wasn't really helpful for manual focus, and it wasn't really helpful for composing. And so, yeah, this image stabilization is just much better than its previous camera. And even though it's 3-axis image stabilization versus Olympus's higher-end cameras have 5-axis stabilization, I'll be honest, I don't see a whole lot between them. I did kind of rig up my EP5, which has the 5-axis, with this to compare the image stabilizations, and I was kind of shaking them both. And maybe there was a slight, benefit to the 5-axis stabilization versus this, but it's not a glaring, obvious difference. The 3-axis stabilization in here is, for all intents and purposes, for my purposes, totally sufficient. The other big feature, like I described, is this tilting screen, which, okay, it's great for selfies, but the tilting screen is actually useful just kind of all around, right? You can tilt it this way so that you can hold the camera down low and take pictures. I really like this when I'm taking pictures of, let's say, pets or kids or a blade of grass or an insect, or you're doing macro photography. Being able to tilt the screen down, hold the camera low, super useful. And then obviously, of course, the screen tilts down so you can hold the camera above you. Great for if you're shooting, let's say you're at a concert and you're trying to shoot a picture over the top of the crowd. It's great for that. The fact that it happens to tilt all the way around and be a selfie camera, that's a benefit for some people. For me, I don't take selfies, so not a big deal for me. The only downside is that I think because of that extra articulation, it makes the screen kind of thick. It sits further back from the back of the camera. It's not flush with the controls like some other cameras that have tilting screens. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that that screen articulates all the way around to do the selfie view. And the thickness isn't a huge factor, not a huge problem, but there are more compact cameras, and I think this would feel a lot more compact if it didn't have that bulging screen on the back. So like I said, I'm not a big selfie photographer. I don't take a lot of selfies, either with my phone or with my Micro Four Thirds cameras. But in the name of science, because I had this camera, I had to take some selfies, and so I did. This selfie functionality, it works as expected. It's nice that the screen view will mirror itself, right? So that it's like you're looking into a mirror versus showing you the scene directly. The other interesting thing about this camera for selfies is that the screen tilts down to the bottom of the camera rather than up to the top of the camera like some other cameras with selfie functionality do. And Olympus say this is because if you're framing a shot and looking at yourself in the screen when it's below the camera, it looks more like you're looking into the camera versus if the screen is on top of the camera. But from my experience, there's not a whole lot to that. If you're taking a selfie, it's great to look at yourself while you're framing the shot, but you still should look into the lens, because I found that even with the screen down here, if I'm looking at the screen and not the lens, the selfie is it's not the best selfie. And when you're taking a selfie, you want the best selfie. You want to put the best selfie forward. If I had it my way, I would have the screen actually flip up to the top. That way I could put it on a tripod and still see myself. It's not a big deal. Again, not a function I'm going to use a whole lot, but there it is. If you are taking selfies though, you do want to make sure that you've got a wide angle lens. I tried taking selfies with a handful of different lenses, again, in the name of science, not because I'm a big selfie connoisseur, but because I know you need to know. And so I tried a bunch of different lenses. I tried the 12mm, I tried a 17mm, a 25mm, and my Olympus 45mm. Both the 12 and the 17mm lenses were pretty good for selfies. They give you a nice wide angle, which makes it easy to frame yourself and a friend. The maybe problem with the 12mm is that it's a little bit too wide, and it tends to distort your face when your face is that much closer to the camera than the background. The 17mm seemed like the perfect balance for selfies. The 25mm, it did the job. It was a little tight. You'll see it's basically a shot of my head versus a shot of my head and shoulders with the wider angles. And then the 45mm lens was not good at all for selfies. It took a selfie. It's very, very close up, as you'll see, and it's kind of uncomfortable. If that's the kind of shot you want, sure, use the 45mm, but really, if you're taking selfies, you're gonna want a wide angle lens. And again, I think the 17mm probably strikes the best balance. Another great feature that this EPL7 has and shares in common with other Olympus cameras is built-in Wi-Fi. This camera can link up with your smartphone via an app, and you can use it for a couple of different functions. Now, one, it's really useful for transferring photos from your camera directly to your phone. I posted a video before about my mobile photography workflow, where I show how I take a picture with my camera, and without using a computer, I transfer the photo from my camera to my phone, I edit it on my phone, and I post it to Instagram, Facebook, wherever. And that's a really great feature to be able to have. Now, the other great feature about Wi-Fi is that you can use your smartphone as a remote shutter. Let's say you set up your camera on a tripod and you get your whole family in front of the camera rather than having to set the camera on a timer, right? So I guess 10-second timer, hit the shutter, run in front of the camera and try and take the picture. You can use the remote shutter function. And what that does is that on your smartphone, you can actually see what the camera is seeing, right? So I can set it up on a tripod, get the family in front of the camera, see that everybody's in view or not, say, hey, Billy, step to the left. I don't have any family members named Billy, but you can say, hey, Billy, step to the left, get into frame. You can see exactly what you're gonna see, and you can fire the shutter from your smartphone. That's really useful. Another benefit of that remote shutter is that it's really useful for long exposures. Let's say you're doing astrophotography and you need to take a 20-second exposure of the sky. Now, if you have a camera, even if you have the camera on a tripod and you press the shutter, you're going to kind of move the camera a little bit. And that will, on a long exposure, end up with a slightly blurred photo. So if you can set up the camera on a tripod and then use your smartphone to activate that shutter, which this will let you do, you don't risk moving the camera and you get a nice smooth exposure. You know, a lot of people will do this with an external remote control, which you can buy separately for a lot of cameras, and it's just nice that you don't have to buy extra with this. And while Olympus's Wi-Fi integration is actually pretty robust, it's still got a couple of problems. One, the Wi-Fi, the image transfers are still kind of painfully slow. You know, you kind of expect it to be a little bit slow. It's going over Wi-Fi. It's not like a USB connection, right? But it's still slower than you expect, and it's slower even than like an iFi memory card. And then the other limitation is kind of related, that you can't transfer RAW files between the camera and your phone. Olympus's software doesn't let you use the wireless transfer for that. Now, as far as problems with this camera, I don't have a lot, but I'll go through them. It doesn't have an electronic viewfinder. A lot of people are very used to holding up the camera to their eye and taking a picture, and for them, not having an EVF, an electronic viewfinder, is a deal breaker. For me, not a deal breaker at all. In fact, you can get an external viewfinder like this and attach it to the camera because it's got the accessory port. And even with, you know, this is Olympus's much lauded VF4 viewfinder. It works with the eye sensor, so it'll turn on and off automatically as you raise it to your eye. So if you need a viewfinder, this is an option, but of course it, you know, adds to the price. If you really want a viewfinder, probably just look at a camera that has one. Another potential issue is that the camera doesn't have a built-in flash, which is kind of odd because Panasonic makes smaller cameras that have built-in flash, so why doesn't this one? It does come with an external flash that you can add on. You know, it comes with this flash so you can put it on and leave it there if you really want to. Obviously, it detracts a little bit from the compactness of the camera. But personally, it's not a big deal for me because I never use flash. Never. I have taken, I don't know, thousands of photos with my EP5, which has a flash built into it, and I've used it for one photo. That's right, one photo I've used flash. So it doesn't have flash built in. I don't care. There are a couple of features that it's lacking that I do care about though. One, and this is kind of a minor point, but the shutter, its max speed is 1/4000th of a second. That sounds incredibly fast. That's much faster than I can run. And frankly, it's a standard maximum shutter speed for a camera. That said, my EP5, which I'm using to record here, has a maximum shutter speed of 1/8000th of a second, which just means that it fires twice as fast. The benefit of that faster shutter is that you can shoot a lens, like an f1.8 lens, you can shoot it wide open in the daylight and you won't risk overexposing your image, at least not in all circumstances. Having 1/4000th of a second shutter speed just means that in more situations you're gonna have to stop the lens down to say f2.8 rather than f1.8. Not a deal breaker by any stretch of the imagination. Again, 1/4000th of a second is totally standard. And then the bigger thing that it's missing, the thing that does kind of grate on me a little bit, is a second control dial. So now, this does have a really nice control dial up here, which you can use for controlling either aperture or your shutter speed, or whatever really you want it to control. I use it usually for aperture. But it doesn't have a second control dial like my EP5 does. Maybe it's just because I've gotten used to shooting with that EP5 that I really miss it, but I do miss it. I wish this had a second dial. Now, maybe you're seeing the second dial here, but this is just a mode dial. It switches between modes, and frankly, if I could control this, or if I could adjust this and change it to control shutter speed rather than modes, that would totally satisfy my complaint. Not having that second control dial, not a deal breaker, not by any stretch. And most people, maybe you don't really care about having a second control dial at all. For me, that is the one issue though, that when I'm shooting with a camera, I'm constantly wishing it had that second control dial. If it had that second control dial, I wouldn't have really any serious complaints about it. Now, I do have to mention one minor issue that I had with the camera, and it only happened a handful of times, so maybe it's not a big problem. But there was one time I went out shooting, and on 3 occasions when I pressed the shutter, I ended up with 2 shutter exposures instead of just 1. Totally by accident. That's not what I was looking for, and the problem is that I ended up with 2 pictures of the same thing instead of 1. So in the grand scheme of things, not a big problem. And I did actually go on a forum and ask other EPL7 owners if they were having the same issue, and none of them reported that issue. And in full disclosure, I haven't had that issue since then, so maybe it's not a problem. But I did have that, come up, and so I feel like I had to mention it. Again, not a deal breaker. The worst case scenario is I ended up with 2 photos of the same thing instead of 1, which not bad at all. Now, Olympus isn't really known for their video capabilities. I happen to use Olympus for all my video needs, and they do the job. But this EPL7, it's no different than the other Olympus cameras. Really, you just have a limited number of bit rates available to you. You can only choose 30 frames per second. If you want to do anything else, 60 frames or 24 frames or whatever, Olympus cameras in general are not going to suit you. If video capability is high on your list of needs for a camera, maybe the EPL7 isn't going to be the right camera for you. That said, again, I use Olympus camera, my EP5, which has basically the same video capability. I use this camera for all my video, and for me, it does the job. I don't need anything other than 30 frames per second, but if you're getting into high-end video production, it's probably not going to cut it the same way that it can cut it for high-end photography. Frankly, the biggest competition that this camera has is Olympus's own camera. They've got the Olympus EM10, which has basically all the same functions of this camera, plus it has the second control dial, which I miss, plus it has an electronic viewfinder, which some people miss. That camera, obviously it's a little bit bigger, not significantly bigger, but it is a little bit less compact, and it does cost about $100 more. So if you are shopping for a Micro Four Thirds camera and you're trying to decide between this and the EM10, it really does come down to, do I want that second control dial, and do I want that electronic viewfinder, and is that worth roughly $100? That's totally up to you. I can't make that decision for you. So that's it. That's my review of the Olympus EPL7. In conclusion, it's the cheapest, smallest way to get into Olympus's excellent image stabilization. It's got the same image quality as their higher end cameras, and maybe it's lacking a couple of features that you'll get if you spend more for the more expensive cameras. But frankly, I have no qualms with recommending this camera. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button down below, and I'll see you in the next episode of Micromatic.